In the heart of Alaska's most unforgiving terrain, where temperatures plummet to deadly lows and civilization feels like a distant memory, one man and his loyal companion face nature's ultimate test. This is the true story of James Reeves, a 52-year-old mountain man, and his husky bear, who ventured into conditions so extreme that survival itself seemed impossible. What they discovered beneath layers of ancient ice would capture the world's attention and remind us all of the incredible bonds that exist between humans, animals, and the natural world. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. James Reeves had lived in the Alaskan wilderness for nearly 2 decades. His cabin, nestled in the Brooks Range, sat approximately 180 miles north of Fairbanks, far from the nearest settlement. Most people would consider such isolation madness, but for James, it was paradise. The former construction worker from Anchorage had left behind a crumbling marriage, mounting debts, and the suffocating pressure of modern life to pursue something more authentic. His only companion was Bear, a 6-year-old Alaskan husky with piercing blue eyes and a thick coat that seemed designed by nature specifically for this harsh environment. James had rescued Bear as a puppy from a musher who was downsizing his team. From that first moment, an unbreakable bond formed between man and dog. Bear wasn't just a pet. He was James's partner, his alarm system, his hunting assistant, and often his only source of warmth during the darkest winter nights. The winter of 2025 was shaping up to be particularly brutal. By mid-January, temperatures had already dropped to -60 degrees Fahrenheit, and weather reports predicted an unprecedented cold snap. The National Weather Service issued warnings about a polar vortex that would bring temperatures down to levels rarely seen, even in Alaska. James had weathered many harsh winters, but something about the forecasts this time made even his seasoned instincts uneasy. Despite the warnings, James had a mission he couldn't postpone. His supply cache, located in a cave system approximately 15 miles northeast of his cabin, needed to be checked before the worst of the winter set in. The cache contained emergency provisions, fuel, and equipment that could mean the difference between life and death if his cabin became inaccessible or damaged during a severe storm. James spent 2 full days preparing for the journey. He packed his heavy-duty sled with supplies, a winter tent rated for extreme temperatures, a portable propane heater, 3 days' worth of food for both himself and Bear, emergency flares, a satellite phone, extra batteries, thermal blankets, and his hunting rifle. He wore layers upon layers of clothing, thermal underwear, fleece mid-layers, a down jacket, and finally his heavy-duty parka with a fur-lined hood. His boots were rated to -80 degrees, and he wore 3 pairs of gloves, thin liners, insulated middle gloves, and heavy mittens on top. Bear watched the preparations with keen intelligence, his tail wagging slowly. The dog knew the signs of an expedition. James fitted Bear with his own protective gear, insulated booties to protect his paws from the ice, and a reflective vest that would make him visible in whiteout conditions. On the morning of January 18th, James checked his thermometer one last time, -62 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky was a pale, crystalline blue, deceptively beautiful. The air was so cold, it felt like breathing shards of glass. When James exhaled, his breath crystallized instantly, creating a cloud of ice particles that tinkled as they fell to the ground. "Ready, boy?" James asked, looking down at Bear. The husky barked once, sharp and clear in the frozen air. They set out at dawn, James pulling the heavily loaded sled, while Bear trotted alongside, his breath creating rhythmic clouds in the freezing air. The snow beneath their feet squeaked with each step, a sound that only occurs when temperatures drop to extreme lows. The landscape around them was otherworldly, endless stretches of white, interrupted only by the dark silhouettes of spruce trees, their branches weighted down with snow. The journey started well enough. James knew the terrain intimately, having traversed it dozens of times over the years. They followed a route that took them through a valley between two mountain ridges, then up a gradual slope toward the higher elevations where the cave system was located. The first 6 hours passed without incident, though James noticed the temperature continuing to drop. His GPS unit showed minus 68 degrees. By early afternoon, they had covered roughly 10 miles. James decided to stop for a brief rest and to check on Bear. The dog seemed in good spirits, though James noticed ice forming around his muzzle despite the protective gear. James melted some snow to give Bear fresh water and shared some of his dried meat with his companion. "We're making good time," James said, more to himself than to Bear. "Another 5 miles and we'll be at the caves. We can wait out the worst there if we need to." As they prepared to continue, James noticed something unusual. The sky, which had been clear all morning, was beginning to change. High, wispy clouds were moving in from the north, and the light had taken on a peculiar quality, flat and grey. James had seen this before. It meant a weather system was approaching, and fast. He checked his satellite phone and pulled up the latest weather data. His heart sank. The polar vortex had intensified and shifted south faster than predicted. Within the next 12 hours, temperatures were expected to plummet to minus 78 degrees Fahrenheit, possibly lower. Wind speeds would increase, creating wind chills that would be instantly fatal to exposed skin. James did a quick calculation. They were too far from the cabin to turn back safely, especially with the weather moving in. Their only option was to push forward to the caves and shelter there until the worst passed. He tightened his gear, checked Bear's booties one more time, and resumed the journey with renewed urgency. The temperature continued its relentless descent. Minus 70 degrees, minus 72. The cold was no longer just uncomfortable. It was hostile, aggressive, searching for any weakness in their defenses. James's eyelashes froze together each time he blinked. His nose ran continuously, the moisture freezing on his face. Even through all his layers, he could feel the cold trying to penetrate, to steal his body heat. Bear began to struggle. Despite his thick coat and natural adaptation to cold, even a husky has limits. James noticed the dog's pace slowing, his gait becoming more labored. They stopped more frequently, and during each stop, James rubbed Bear's muscles to keep the blood flowing and checked for signs of frostbite on the dog's ears and paws. As evening approached, the weather system hit with full force. The wind, which had been relatively calm all day, suddenly picked up, howling across the landscape like a living thing. Snow that had been settled on the ground for weeks was picked up and thrown into the air, creating a whiteout that reduced visibility to mere feet. The temperature gauge on James's equipment showed minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind chill pushed the effective temperature even lower. James had experienced many storms in his years in Alaska, but this was different. This was the kind of cold that killed, the kind of cold that early explorers had written about in their journals, often in their final entries. He could feel it trying to find a way through his clothing, probing for gaps, searching for exposed skin. They were still roughly 2 miles from the cave system. 2 miles that suddenly felt like 200. James knew they had to keep moving. Stopping now in this wind, in this cold, would be fatal, but moving was becoming increasingly difficult. The sled felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Each step required conscious effort. His muscles were beginning to protest, the cold making them stiff and unresponsive. Bear stayed close to James's side, using his master's body as a windbreak. The dog's usual energetic trot had been reduced to a slow, determined plod. James could hear Bear's breathing, labored and harsh in the screaming wind. "Come on, boy!" James shouted over the storm, though his voice was immediately torn away by the wind. "Just a little further. We can make it." The world had been reduced to a grey-white void. James navigated by instinct and GPS, trusting his years of experience and his knowledge of the terrain. He knew there was a stand of trees ahead, then a small ridge, and beyond that, the entrance to the cave system. Each landmark had to be reached one at a time, one step at a time. Time lost meaning. Minutes felt like hours. James's world narrowed to the next step, then the next, then the next. He could feel exhaustion setting in, the dangerous kind that whispers lies about resting, about lying down for just a moment. He fought against it, knowing that to give in would mean death for both him and Bear. Then through the swirling snow, James saw the dark outline of the rock face that marked the cave entrance. Relief flooded through him, giving him a surge of energy. They had made it. The cave entrance was partially blocked by snow and ice, but James managed to clear enough space for them to squeeze through. Inside, the temperature was still brutally cold, but at least they were protected from the wind. That alone made an enormous difference. James's GPS showed -78 degrees Fahrenheit outside. The wind chill was calculated at -110. James worked quickly to set up their shelter despite his frozen fingers. He inflated the emergency tent, which would provide an additional layer of insulation, and fired up the portable propane heater. The small flame seemed like a miracle, a tiny sun in the frozen darkness. Slowly, gradually, the temperature inside their makeshift shelter began to rise. It would never be warm, not truly warm, but it would be survivable. Bear collapsed immediately, his sides heaving. James removed the dog's booties and carefully examined his paws for frostbite. Miraculously, they seemed intact, though the pads were cold to the touch. He wrapped Bear in a thermal blanket and held him close, sharing body heat. If you're enjoying this story so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me continue creating this content. That night was the longest of James's life. Outside, the storm raged with a fury that seemed almost personal. The wind screamed through the rocks, creating an otherworldly symphony of howls and moans. Even inside the cave, inside the tent, with the heater running, the cold was pervasive. It seeped through every barrier, a constant reminder of nature's overwhelming power. James couldn't sleep. Part of it was the cold, but mostly it was fear. Not fear for himself. He had long ago made peace with the possibility of dying in these mountains, but fear for Bear. The dog had given him years of loyal companionship, asking for nothing more than food, shelter, and affection in return. The thought of Bear suffering because of his decision to make this journey was almost unbearable. He checked on the dog constantly throughout the night. Bear slept fitfully, whimpering occasionally, his legs twitching as he dreamed. James kept one hand on the dog's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, reassuring himself that Bear was still alive, still fighting. The heater was their lifeline, but James knew he had to ration the propane carefully. He had brought 2 canisters, which should last 3 days if used sparingly. The weather reports on his satellite phone indicated the extreme cold would persist for at least 48 hours before beginning to moderate. They would have to wait it out. As dawn broke, though in the cave it was impossible to tell except by checking his watch, James assessed their situation. They had food, water, fuel, and shelter. Bear seemed to be recovering from yesterday's ordeal, his breathing more regular, his eyes brighter. They could survive this. They just had to be patient. On the second day, with the storm still raging outside, James decided to explore deeper into the cave system. He had been here before, but never had the time or inclination to venture far from the main chamber. Now, with nothing but time, curiosity got the better of him. The caves were extensive, formed thousands of years ago by water erosion. James had heard stories from local indigenous people about these caves being used as shelter by ancient peoples, perhaps as far back as 10,000 years. Some claimed there were cave paintings deep inside, though James had never seen them himself. He equipped himself with a high-powered flashlight and rope. Bear, recovered enough to be curious, followed closely. They moved slowly through the passages, James's light revealing stunning rock formations, stalactites and stalagmites, frozen waterfalls of stone, chambers that opened into cathedral-like spaces. The cave maintained a relatively constant temperature year-round, somewhere around -20 degrees Fahrenheit at this time of year, cold by any reasonable standard, but positively balmy compared to the death trap outside. As they moved deeper, James noticed something interesting. The cave seemed to be sloping downward, taking them below the surface level of the entrance. After about 30 minutes of careful exploration, they entered a chamber unlike any James had seen before. It was enormous, perhaps 50 feet across and 30 feet high, but what caught James's attention wasn't the size. It was the ice. One entire wall of the chamber was covered in clear blue ice. Not the opaque, snow-compressed ice that James was used to seeing, but transparent ice that seemed to glow in his flashlight beam. It was beautiful, otherworldly, like looking into a frozen ocean. James approached the ice wall, fascinated. As he got closer, he noticed something strange. There appeared to be shapes within the ice, dark forms suspended in the crystalline matrix. At first, he thought they might be rocks or debris that had been trapped as the ice formed. But as he examined them more carefully, his heart began to race. They weren't rocks, they were objects, man-made objects. James pressed his face close to the ice, his breath creating a small circle of fog on the surface. There, trapped in ice that must have been hundreds or perhaps thousands of years old, he could see what appeared to be tools, carved implements, possibly bone or antler. Further to the left, he spotted what looked like the edge of a woven basket. "Bear, come look at this," James whispered, though there was no one else to disturb. The dog padded over and sniffed at the ice, his tail wagging slowly. James pulled out his phone and began taking pictures, his mind racing. If these were artifacts from ancient peoples, they could be incredibly significant. The preservation in ice meant they would be in pristine condition, possibly offering insights into how people lived in this region thousands of years ago. But there was something else, something that made James's discovery even more remarkable. As he examined the ice wall more carefully, moving his light across its surface, he saw something that made him catch his breath. Frozen in the ice, perfectly preserved, was what appeared to be a human hand. James's first instinct was to step back, a primal response to encountering human remains. But scientific curiosity quickly overcame his initial shock. He moved closer again, examining the hand carefully. It was small, possibly belonging to a woman or adolescent. The skin, or what he could see of it through the ice, appeared remarkably well preserved, still retaining some color. Following the line of the arm back into the ice, James could make out the shape of a body, curled into what might have been a sleeping position. The ice wasn't completely transparent in that area, making it difficult to see details, but the form was unmistakable. James sat down heavily on a nearby rock, his mind struggling to process what he had found. This wasn't just an archaeological site. This was potentially a tomb, a place where someone had died and been naturally mummified by the ice. Given the depth in the cave and the thickness of the ice, this person had been here for a very long time, perhaps centuries, perhaps longer. He thought about what he should do. His first obligation was to survive the storm and get himself and Bear back to safety. But after that, this discovery needed to be reported to authorities, to archaeologists, to people who could properly document and study it. This was too important to keep to himself. James spent hours documenting everything he could see. He took hundreds of photographs from every angle, made detailed notes about the location within the cave system, and even sketched rough maps of how to find this chamber. All the while, Bear lay near the entrance to the chamber, watching his master work with patient eyes. As James worked, he found himself thinking about the person trapped in the ice. Who were they? What had brought them to this cave? Had they been seeking shelter from a storm like he was, only to never leave? The thought was sobering. These mountains had been taking lives for thousands of years. The cold was an equal opportunity killer, caring nothing for when you lived or what technology you possessed. James had always felt a deep respect for the land and for those who had come before him. The indigenous peoples of Alaska had survived in this environment for millennia before the first European explorers arrived. They had developed sophisticated knowledge and techniques for dealing with the extreme conditions. This person in the ice was part of that long history, a link to a past that was rapidly being forgotten. He made a silent promise to the frozen figure. He would treat this discovery with respect. He would make sure that proper protocols were followed, that if possible, this person's remains would be studied with dignity and, if appropriate, returned to any living descendants. Some stories demanded to be told, but they needed to be told in the right way. Encouraged by his initial find, James began to examine the ice wall more systematically. He discovered more artifacts, what appeared to be a stone knife, several pieces of worked leather that might have been clothing, and a collection of small carved objects whose purpose wasn't immediately clear. Each discovery he photographed and documented meticulously. In one section of the ice, he found what looked like the remains of a small fire pit, complete with charred wood and what might have been animal bones. This suggested that at some point, long ago, this chamber had been used as a living space. Perhaps the ice had formed gradually, preserving everything in its path, or perhaps the entire cave system had once been warmer and had only frozen over time. The implications were staggering. This cave could be a time capsule, preserving a snapshot of life in ancient Alaska. The artifacts and remains could tell stories about diet, clothing, tools, social structures, and survival strategies. For someone like James, who had always been fascinated by how people adapted to extreme environments, it was like discovering a treasure trove. Bear eventually grew bored with watching James work and wandered back toward their camp. James reluctantly decided to follow. He had documented everything he could for now, and they still needed to monitor the storm and conserve their resources. Back in their small shelter, James heated some water for coffee and shared dried meat with Bear. The storm outside showed no signs of abating. According to his satellite phone, the temperature had actually dropped even further, -81 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind continued to howl, a constant reminder that they were trapped here until nature decided otherwise. James found himself unable to stop thinking about his discovery. He pulled out his phone and reviewed the photographs he had taken. In the small screen's glow, the images seemed almost unreal, like something from a museum exhibition rather than something he had discovered himself. He thought about how he would report this. He would need to contact the Alaska Department of Natural Resources, probably the Office of History and Archaeology. There would be permits required, proper archaeological surveys conducted. It would be a long process, but James was patient. He had waited 2 decades in these mountains. He could wait a bit longer to see this story properly told. Leave a comment below about what you think about this discovery so far. I'd love to hear your thoughts. On the morning of the 3rd day, James woke to an unfamiliar sound. Silence. The constant roar of the wind had stopped. He checked his satellite phone and felt a wave of relief. The temperature had risen to -65 degrees Fahrenheit, still dangerously cold, but survivable for travel. The polar vortex had moved on, heading south toward the lower 48 states. Bear seemed to sense the change immediately. The dog was more alert, his tail wagging with renewed energy. James knew they needed to take advantage of this window. Weather in Alaska could change rapidly, and there was no guarantee that another storm system wouldn't move in. He packed their supplies methodically, making sure everything was secured properly. Before leaving, he made one final trip back to the ice chamber. He wanted to see it one more time, to verify in his mind that it was real and not some hallucination brought on by cold and exhaustion. The chamber looked exactly as he had left it. The ice wall gleamed in his flashlight beam, its frozen secrets still locked away. James took a few more photographs, marking the GPS coordinates precisely on his phone. Then, feeling like he was leaving behind something precious, He made his way back to the entrance. The journey back to the cabin was challenging but manageable. The storm had deposited several feet of fresh snow, making the sled harder to pull, but at least the wind had died down, and the temperature, while still extreme, was no longer immediately life-threatening. James and Bear moved slowly and carefully, taking frequent breaks. James's body was exhausted from the ordeal, his muscles sore from 3 days of fighting against the cold. Bear too seemed tired, but the dog's spirits were high. He seemed to understand that they were going home. They followed their original route in reverse, retracing their path through the valley. The landscape had been transformed by the storm. Snow covered everything in pristine white drifts, sculpted by the wind into fantastic shapes. The sky had cleared completely, revealing that impossibly deep blue color that only appears in extreme cold. The sun hung low on the horizon, providing light but precious little warmth. As they traveled, James's mind kept returning to the ice chamber and its frozen inhabitant. He wondered how long it would take to organize a proper expedition to the site. Spring would be the earliest feasible time, when temperatures were more moderate and the days were longer. That gave him several months to plan, to contact the right people, to ensure everything was done properly. He also thought about the story this discovery would tell. News media would certainly be interested. A frozen ancient human discovered in a remote Alaskan cave by a mountain man and his dog. It had all the elements of a compelling narrative. But James was wary of sensationalism. He wanted the focus to be on the scientific and historical significance, not on him. After 2 long days of travel, broken up by one night camping in a protected spot among some spruce trees, James and Bear finally reached the cabin. James had never been so happy to see that small, rough structure. It represented safety, warmth, and survival. He got a fire going in the wood stove immediately, then fed Bear a full meal. The dog ate voraciously, then collapsed on his favorite spot near the stove and was asleep within minutes. James allowed himself a rare glass of whiskey, feeling the liquid burn down his throat and spread warmth through his chest. Over the next few days, James recovered from the journey. He ate well, slept long hours, and let his body heal from the extreme stress it had endured. Bear, resilient as only a husky can be, seemed completely recovered within 24 hours and was soon back to his normal routine of patrolling the area around the cabin and alerting James to any wildlife in the vicinity. A week after returning to the cabin, when he felt fully recovered, James sat down with his satellite phone and began making calls. His first contact was with Dr. Sarah Chen, an archaeologist at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, whom he had met years ago at a gathering in Fairbanks. She specialized in ancient Alaskan cultures and had always been friendly and approachable. When Dr. Chen answered, James could hear the surprise in her voice. "James Reeves, is that really you? It's been years." "Hi, Sarah. Yes, it's me. Listen, I need to tell you about something I found, and I need your advice on how to proceed." Over the next hour, James described everything: the journey into the storm, the cave system, the ice wall, the artifacts, and most importantly, the frozen human remains. He sent her the photographs through his satellite connection, which took some time given the limited bandwidth. There was a long silence after he finished. Then Dr. Chen's voice came back, tight with excitement. "James, if these photographs are authentic, and I have no reason to doubt you, this is an incredibly significant discovery. The preservation looks remarkable. The location, the artifacts, this could be thousands of years old, maybe even predating the Clovis people. We need to get a team up there as soon as weather permits." Over the following weeks, James became the center of a whirlwind of activity, though all of it conducted remotely through his satellite phone and email. Dr. Chen brought in colleagues from the university, as well as representatives from the Alaska Department of Natural Resources and the Alaska Native Heritage Center. Everyone agreed that this was a discovery of major significance, but it needed to be handled with extreme care and cultural sensitivity. One of the first steps was to consult with local Alaska Native communities. The cave system was located in an area that was traditionally used by Athabascan peoples, and it was essential that they be involved in any decisions about how to proceed. James participated in several conference calls with tribal elders, describing what he had found and answering questions about the location and condition of the remains. The elders listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and consulted among themselves. Their primary concern was that any human remains be treated with dignity and respect, according to traditional customs. They agreed that scientific study could be valuable, particularly if it could shed light on how their ancestors lived and adapted to the harsh environment, but they wanted to ensure that the remains would eventually receive a proper burial if it was determined that they were indeed ancient Athabascan. James was moved by the elders' wisdom and their balanced approach to the situation. They understood the value of scientific knowledge, but never lost sight of the human dimension of the discovery. It reminded him why he had such respect for indigenous cultures, their ability to honor both the past and the future simultaneously. As word of the discovery began to spread through academic circles, it was inevitable that news media would catch wind of the story. A reporter from the Anchorage Daily News was the first to track James down, somehow getting his satellite phone number. The conversation was awkward. James was not comfortable with interviews, but the reporter was persistent, and eventually James agreed to a brief phone interview. The story ran on the front page of the newspaper under the headline, "Mountain Man and His Dog Survive Extreme Cold, Discover Ancient Frozen Remains." The article was generally well done, focusing on both the survival aspect and the archaeological significance of the find. It included several of James's photographs, and within hours of publication, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. James's phone began ringing constantly. Producers from television news programs wanted interviews. Documentary filmmakers wanted to tell his story. Even a Hollywood producer called, talking about a potential movie deal. James politely declined most of these requests, agreeing only to a few interviews with reputable news organizations and scientific publications. What surprised him most was the public reaction. His email inbox, which he checked occasionally through a slow satellite connection, filled with messages from people around the world. Some were from academics excited about the discovery. Others were from fellow outdoor enthusiasts who related to his lifestyle. But many were simply from ordinary people who were moved by the story of survival and discovery and by the bond between James and Bear. If James was uncomfortable with the attention, Bear seemed completely indifferent to his newfound fame. The dog continued his daily routine as if nothing had changed: morning patrol of the area, afternoon nap by the fire, evening meal, sleep. James found this grounding. While the world outside was excited about their story, here in the cabin, life went on, as it always had. However, James did indulge in one piece of attention for Bear. A dog food company reached out, wanting to feature Bear in an advertisement, emphasizing the toughness and reliability of their product. James normally would have refused, but the company offered to donate a year's supply of premium dog food, plus make a substantial contribution to Alaskan wildlife conservation efforts. He accepted, on the condition that the advertisement be tasteful and accurate. The resulting commercial was simple: footage of Bear in the snow, text overlay describing his survival of -78-degree temperatures, and a straightforward message about quality nutrition for working dogs. It ran during the Super Bowl and made Bear briefly one of the most recognizable dogs in America. James received hundreds of letters addressed to Bear. Children drew pictures of the heroic husky. An elementary school in Minnesota adopted Bear as their mascot. Through it all, Bear remained blissfully unaware, more interested in the rabbit tracks he found near the cabin than in his status as a canine celebrity. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, preparations for the expedition to the cave intensified. Dr. Chen had assembled a team of archaeologists, anthropologists, climate scientists, and specialists in ancient DNA analysis. The Alaska Department of Natural Resources had issued the necessary permits. Representatives from the Alaska Native community would be present throughout the excavation and study process. The plan was ambitious but carefully thought out. The team would spend 2 weeks at the site, working in shifts to minimize the time the ice chamber was exposed to warmer temperatures. They would document everything in minute detail before attempting to extract any artifacts or remains. A portable lab would be set up to perform initial analyses on site. James had agreed to serve as a guide, leading the team to the cave system and providing logistical support. He knew the terrain, understood the weather patterns, and could help ensure everyone's safety. It felt right to be part of this next chapter of the story, to see through what he had begun. In early May, when the temperature had moderated to a relatively balmy -10 degrees Fahrenheit and the daylight hours had extended significantly, the expedition was scheduled to begin. 2 helicopters would transport the team and equipment to a landing zone about 3 miles from the cave, and from there they would travel overland. The night before the expedition was to begin, James sat in his cabin with Bear sleeping at his feet and thought about the strange journey his life had taken. He had come to these mountains seeking solitude and simplicity, trying to escape the complications of modern life. And yet, here he was, at the center of an international story, about to participate in what could be one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in recent Alaskan history. But as he reflected on it more, he realized that perhaps it wasn't as contradictory as it seemed. Life in the wilderness had taught him that plans were just suggestions, that nature had its own agenda, and that the most meaningful moments often came when you least expected them. He had set out to check a supply cache and had instead found a window into the ancient past. More than that, he had survived an experience that would have killed most people. The -78-degree temperatures, the storm, the desperate push to reach shelter. These weren't just statistics. They represented a test of will, preparation, and the bond between man and dog. They had faced nature at its most hostile and had emerged on the other side. James looked down at Bear, who twitched in his sleep, perhaps dreaming of rabbit chases or mountain adventures. "What do you think, boy?" James said softly. "Ready for one more trip to those caves?" Bear's ear flicked, but he didn't wake. James smiled. The dog had the right idea. Whatever came next, they would face it together, one step at a time, just as they always had. The expedition team arrived in 3 waves over 2 days in early May. James watched from near his cabin as the helicopters circled before landing in a clearing he had helped select. 22 people emerged, along with an enormous amount of equipment: portable shelters, scientific instruments, communication gear, food supplies, and safety equipment. Dr. Sarah Chen was among the first to greet James. She was a small woman in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and an infectious enthusiasm for her work. "James, it's so good to see you in person, and this must be the famous Bear." Bear, always friendly with new people, allowed Dr. Chen to pet him, his tail wagging. James felt a surge of pride in his companion. Despite all the attention, Bear remained exactly who he had always been, a good-natured, loyal dog. The journey to the cave took almost a full day, slowed by the amount of equipment that needed to be transported. James led the way, with Bear ranging ahead as he always did, investigating interesting scents and occasionally looking back to make sure James was following. The landscape had transformed since James's winter journey. Snow still covered everything, but the quality of it had changed. Spring snow was softer, wetter, and the temperatures, hovering around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, felt almost warm compared to the brutal cold of January. Small rivulets of meltwater were beginning to form, the first signs of the seasonal thaw that would turn the landscape into a different world by late June. The team members were in good spirits, excited about the work ahead. James found himself answering countless questions about the area, about his lifestyle, about the discovery. He tried to be patient, though he was more comfortable with solitude than conversation. Eventually, Dr. Chen noticed his discomfort and quietly asked the others to give him some space. As they approached the cave system, James felt a strange mix of anticipation and apprehension. For months, this place had existed in his memory and in the photographs on his phone. Now he would see it again, but this time surrounded by experts who would interpret and analyze what he had found. Part of him worried that the reality wouldn't match what he remembered, that he had somehow misunderstood or exaggerated the significance of the discovery. The expedition established a base camp about 100 yards from the cave entrance. Portable shelters went up quickly, along with a cooking area, equipment storage, and a generator to power lights and scientific instruments. James was impressed by the efficiency of the operation. This was clearly a well-organized team. That evening, over a communal dinner of freeze-dried meals that were surprisingly good, Dr. Chen outlined the plan for the coming days. Tomorrow, we'll do an initial survey of the cave system. James will guide a small team to the ice chamber so we can assess the site and begin planning our approach. We'll set up lighting, take measurements, and start detailed photography. The day after, we'll begin the process of documenting everything we can see through the ice. She paused, looking around at the team. I want to remind everyone that this is potentially a sacred site. We have representatives from the local Alaska Native community joining us tomorrow, and they will be part of all our decisions about how to proceed. Our goal is to learn as much as we can while showing the utmost respect for the person whose remains we're studying. James appreciated her words. It was clear that Dr. Chen understood the weight of what they were doing. The next morning, James led a team of 6 people into the cave, with Bear leading the way as always. They carried high-powered lights, cameras, and measurement equipment. The journey through the cave passages felt different this time, less mysterious, more clinical, but no less awe-inspiring. When they reached the ice chamber, James heard several gasps of amazement. Even having seen his photographs, nothing had prepared the team for the reality of the ice wall. It gleamed in the artificial light, blue-white and crystalline, a natural work of art that happened to contain invaluable historical information. Dr. Chen approached the ice slowly, reverently. She spent several minutes just looking, not speaking, taking it all in. Then she turned to James with tears in her eyes. James, this is extraordinary. The preservation is better than anything I've seen, better than some finds in permafrost. The ice has protected everything. Over the next several hours, the team set up equipment and began the process of documentation. High-resolution cameras on tripods captured every inch of the ice wall. A laser scanning system created a 3-dimensional map of the chamber. Temperature and humidity sensors were placed to monitor conditions. If you enjoyed learning about this incredible discovery, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot. That afternoon, 3 elders from the local Athabascan community arrived by helicopter. James had spoken with them on the phone, but meeting in person was different. They were all in their 70s or 80s, their faces weathered by decades of Alaskan weather, their eyes reflecting wisdom earned through long lives lived close to the land. James led them to the ice chamber, with Dr. Chen and a translator accompanying them. The elders were silent as they entered the chamber, their expressions serious. They stood before the ice wall for a long time, speaking quietly to each other in their native language. Finally, one of them, a woman named Mary Taku, spoke in English. This person was here a long time, very long time. Maybe before my people came to this land, maybe after. The ice keeps their story safe. She turned to Dr. Chen. You want to learn from this person, learn how they lived, what they ate, how they survived the cold. This is good. Our young people should know how strong our ancestors were, how smart they were. But this person must be honored, not put in museum like a thing. They were a person. They had family. They had dreams. Dr. Chen nodded seriously. I promise you, Mary, that we will treat this person with all the respect they deserve. Everything we learn will be shared with your community first. And when our work is done, we will follow your guidance on what should happen to the remains. Mary Taku studied Dr. Chen's face for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Then you may do your work, but we will watch. We will be here to make sure the old ways are honored. The actual process of studying the ice was painstakingly slow. The team couldn't simply melt the ice, as that would damage or destroy much of what they were trying to study. Instead, they used a combination of techniques: careful documentation through the ice, strategic drilling to extract small samples for analysis, and in some areas, the use of warm air to gradually, carefully expose certain artifacts. Each day brought new discoveries. The stone tools were confirmed to be between 8 and 10,000 years old, based on their style and craftsmanship. The woven basket contained dried berries that miraculously were still identifiable, a mix of blueberries and crowberries that still grew in the region. Small bone fragments from the fire pit were sent for analysis and revealed that the diet included caribou, rabbit, and fish. But the most significant breakthrough came when the team managed to extract a tiny sample of tissue from the frozen remains for DNA analysis. The sample was immediately placed in a special preservation container and would be sent to a specialized laboratory for analysis, but preliminary tests suggested that the DNA was intact and could be successfully sequenced. If we can get a full genome, Dr. Chen explained to James one evening, we'll be able to understand so much. We'll know about their ancestry, their genetic relationship to modern indigenous populations, even possibly some things about their health and physical characteristics. It's like reading a history book written in molecules. Throughout all of this, Bear remained a constant presence. The dog had become something of a mascot for the expedition, and team members would often take breaks to play with him or simply sit and scratch his ears. James noticed that people seemed more relaxed around Bear, that the dog provided a kind of emotional anchor amidst the intense scientific work. One afternoon, as James was watching Bear play with several team members, Mary Taku came and sat beside him. "Your dog is good," she said simply. "Dogs know things. They know who to trust, who has a good heart. Bear trusts these people. That's important." James looked at the elderly woman, seeing the wisdom in her eyes. "He's been a good companion," James said. "I don't know if I would have survived that storm without him." "That's how it's supposed to be," Mary replied. "People and dogs. We've been together for thousands of years. Longer, maybe. That person in the ice, they probably had dogs too. Dogs who helped them hunt, who kept them warm, who were their family. Some things don't change, even after all this time." James felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought about it quite that way, but she was right. The bond he shared with Bear was part of an ancient tradition, a relationship that stretched back to the very dawn of human civilization, and perhaps before. As the days passed and more information was gathered, Dr. Chen's team began to piece together a picture of who the person in the ice had been and how they had lived. Based on the bone structure visible through the ice and the artifacts found around them, they determined it was most likely a young woman, probably in her late teens or early 20s. The style of the tools and the radiocarbon dating suggested she had lived approximately 9,000 years ago, during a period when Alaska was warmer than it is today, but still cold by most standards. The cave system had probably been used as a regular shelter, a place where small groups could take refuge during hunting expeditions or harsh weather. The presence of sewing equipment, bone needles, and what appeared to be sinew thread suggested that she had been involved in making clothing, a crucial skill for survival in the Arctic. The berries in the basket indicated it was probably late summer or early fall when she died. a time when people would be gathering and preserving food for the coming winter. But how had she died? And why had she been left in the cave? These questions were harder to answer. There were no obvious signs of trauma, no indication of violence. One theory was that she had been caught by a sudden early winter storm, similar to what James and Bear had experienced, and had taken shelter in the cave but succumbed to hypothermia or perhaps illness. Another theory, proposed by Mary Taku, was that she had been placed there intentionally as part of a burial ritual. Some ancient cultures believed that caves were portals to the spirit world, sacred places where the dead could begin their journey to the afterlife. The fact that she had been buried with tools and food suggested preparation for a journey. 2 weeks into the expedition, the preliminary DNA results came back from the laboratory. Dr. Chen called a special meeting to share the findings, making sure the elders were present first to hear the news before anyone else. "The results are remarkable," Dr. Chen began, her voice filled with excitement. "The DNA is well preserved, and we've been able to sequence a significant portion of the genome. The analysis shows that this individual shares genetic markers with modern Athabascan peoples, but also with other indigenous groups across North America and even some populations in Siberia." She pulled up a presentation on a laptop, showing charts and graphs that meant little to James, but clearly excited the scientists in the room. What this suggests is that this woman was part of one of the early populations that crossed from Asia into North America, possibly during or shortly after the last ice age. Her people would have been among the first to settle in this region. Mary Taku leaned forward, her eyes intent. "So she is one of the ancient ones, the first people, the ones our stories talk about." "Yes," Dr. Chen said softly. "In a very real sense, she could be one of your direct ancestors. The genetic lineage leads directly to modern Athabascan populations." There was a long silence in the room as everyone absorbed this information. James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't just an archaeological curiosity or a scientific specimen. This was a real person, a young woman who had lived and loved and dreamed 9,000 years ago, and whose descendants were sitting in this very room. After the meeting, the elders asked for time to discuss among themselves what should happen next. They withdrew to a quiet corner of the camp, speaking in low voices for over an hour. Finally, Mary Taku emerged with the other elders and called everyone together. "We have talked," she said, her voice carrying authority despite her age. "We have heard what the scientists have found, and we understand that this is important knowledge. But we have also prayed and thought about what this young woman would want, what would be right according to our traditions." She paused, looking around at the gathered team. "She should stay here. This cave is where she came to rest, and it should remain her resting place. The scientists can continue to study what they can see through the ice, can take the small samples they need for their work, but her body should not be removed. She belongs to this mountain, to this land." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "We respect that decision completely. We've gathered enough information to keep researchers busy for years. The site itself, preserved as it is, will be invaluable for future study as techniques improve. We'll recommend that the cave be designated as a protected archaeological site." The final days of the expedition were spent carefully documenting everything, packing up equipment, and beginning the process of sealing off the ice chamber to protect it from future disturbance. A gate would be installed at the cave entrance, not to keep people out entirely, but to ensure that any future access would be controlled and respectful. James watched all of this with mixed feelings. Part of him was proud to have made such a significant discovery. Part of him was glad that the young woman in the ice would remain undisturbed in the place where she had rested for 9 millennia. But part of him also felt a sense of loss, as if he were saying goodbye to something important. On the final evening before the team was to leave, James returned to the ice chamber one last time, alone except for Bear. He stood before the ice wall, looking at the shape of the ancient woman, and spoke quietly. "I'm sorry we disturbed your rest," he said. "But I think your story needed to be told. People need to know how strong your people were, how they survived in this hard land. Your descendants are proud of you. I hope you can rest easy knowing that." Bear whined softly and pressed against James's leg. They stood there together for several minutes, man and dog, in silence, paying their respects to someone who had made the same kind of journey they had made, facing the same brutal cold, the same unforgiving landscape 9,000 years before. The story of the discovery made international headlines. 9,000-year-old remains found in Alaskan cave. Mountain man's discovery rewrites Arctic history. Ancient woman found frozen in time. The photographs and findings were published in major scientific journals. Documentaries were commissioned. The site became one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the decade. But for James, life gradually returned to normal. The reporters eventually stopped calling. The helicopters stopped flying over. The teams of scientists went back to their universities. He and Bear were alone again in their cabin, and James found that he was grateful for the return to simplicity. The experience had changed him, though. He felt more connected to the long history of the land he lived on, more aware that he was just one person in a chain of humans who had called these mountains home. Every time he looked at the peaks surrounding his cabin, he thought about all the people who had looked at these same mountains over thousands of years. A year after the expedition, James received a package in his monthly mail delivery. It was a book, beautifully bound, with a photograph of the ice wall on the cover. The title read, "Frozen in Time, the Discovery of a 9,000-year-old Woman in Arctic Alaska." Inside was a dedication to James Reeves and Bear, whose courage and curiosity made this discovery possible, and to the unnamed young woman whose story we have tried to tell with respect and wonder. James sat in his cabin that evening, Bear sleeping at his feet, and read through the book. It told the story of the discovery, of the expedition, of what scientists had learned about life in ancient Alaska. There were interviews with him, though he barely remembered giving them. There were detailed analyses of the artifacts, the DNA results, the environmental conditions of 9,000 years ago. But what moved him most was the final chapter, written by Mary Taku. In it, she spoke about the importance of honoring ancestors, of understanding that the past was not dead, but lived on in the present. She talked about the traditions that had been passed down through countless generations, the knowledge of how to survive in harsh conditions, the deep connection to the land. "This young woman," Mary wrote, "has taught us that we are stronger than we know. Our ancestors survived impossible conditions with simple tools and deep knowledge. Their blood runs in our veins. Their courage lives in our hearts. When we face difficulties today, we can remember them and find strength." James closed the book and looked out the window at the mountains, dark against the evening sky. Bear stirred in his sleep and moved closer to the fire. Outside, the temperature was dropping as night fell, but inside the cabin it was warm and safe. He thought about the journey that had led to this moment, the storm, the discovery, the expedition, everything that had followed. It had been unexpected, overwhelming at times, but also meaningful. He had helped tell a story that deserved to be told, and in the process had learned something about himself and about the incredible resilience of the human spirit. "We did good, Bear," he said quietly to the sleeping dog. "We did good." And in the morning, they would wake up and life would continue one day at a time. In the mountains, they both called home. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think about James and Bear's incredible journey and discovery. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories like this one.